As Austin Public Library prepares to open the new Central Library, it's an appropriate time to remember the life of John Henry Faulk, who of course provides the name of the building of the current Central Library. In this podcast episode, we will listen to an interview with Mr. Faulk, initially broadcast on a radio station in Waco in the mid-70s. This recording can be found in the Austin History Center's Oral History Collection, amongst thousands of other recordings sharing stories about Austin's past. The Austin History Center will soon move into the John Henry Faulk building, allowing for more space to easier access the various collections preserved by the Austin History Center. Visit Austin History Center in person or online for more information about collections, including the Oral History Collection from which this recording came from. Listen now to John Henry Faulk, whose comments about freedom of speech are as relevant today as when he said them in the mid-70s.
Tonight, FM 107 News presents a special report on John Henry Faulk, the man and his ideas. Faulk gained national recognition during the late 50s when he filed the libel and damage suit against Aware Incorporated. Aware was an anti-communist organization that practiced blacklisting members of the media through innuendo, half-truths, and untruths. John Henry Faulk, in a landmark case, was awarded $3.5 million in damages, the largest amount ever awarded in history. According to Faulk, the jury deemed this necessary to end blacklisting forever. This was only one experience in the life of Faulk that made him reevaluate his strong belief in the First Amendment, the individual freedoms guaranteed by law. Faulk now has a 2-hour talk show on WRR AM radio in Dallas, which is dedicated to the principles of the Bill of Rights and freedoms of the people. In an interview with 107 News after his speech Thursday morning, Faulk talked about the importance of the free exchange of ideas. He explained that there was a need for a free flow of communication without the fear of being oppressed for expressing ideas.
In the last 25 years, we have fallen on pretty hard times, as Watergate illustrated, where we substituted epithet and name-calling and labels for a real exchange of ideas on issues that are of deep concern to the American people.
Well, how are people maintaining this equal amount of freedom? Is it by speaking out, and are people doing that more so today?
Oh, yes. And this gets back to my program that I'm doing in Dallas, this opening of the dialogue, encouraging people to speak out. See, our Constitution guarantees you the right to hold your opinion and to express it without any being intimidated or harassed. It doesn't doesn't say that you have to be right. You can be wrong. I've been wrong as often as I've been right in various opinions that I've held or ideas that I've held.
Why then do you think that many people are afraid to speak out for things that they do believe in?
Because a climate of fear was generated and very carefully manipulated in our society that repressed and made unpopular those who would express opinions that didn't follow the official line. And this had a chilling effect on the open dialogue in our society. And it was carefully manipulated by the government. For instance, long before Mr. Nixon got up his enemy list that shocked the American people. So the FBI and the House Un-American Activities Committee were keeping enemy lists. That, of course, was in clear violation of the constitutional mandate against bills of attainder.
Well, how can this process be reversed, that of fear and anxiety being removed from our society, thereby letting people speak out without fear of having something bad happen to them?
It can only be reversed by reflecting on what the Founding Fathers had about when they set up this government, what our compact of government really means. We, the peoples of the United States, do ordain and establish this Constitution. We have to open the dialogue so people will not only be free to think and to publish their thoughts without any fear of repression or intimidation or harassment, but won't even have to stop and ask themselves if they are free to do so.
A few years ago, you were a humorist and a lecturer, and part of your lectures were on the American heritage. Is this when you got so involved with the freedoms that were granted to us within the Constitution?
Well, yes and no. I really didn't re-examine those freedoms. I'd absorbed them, and my father was a lawyer who had been very oriented toward the protection of rights of less privileged peoples, the blacks and the poor whites of South Austin. So I'd absorbed him from that, a sense of the importance of this. But also I had got involved in this lawsuit, and I had to go back and reread the history of this country and what the issues were that confronted our founding fathers and what they were seeking to do when they set up our charter of government, the Constitution of the United States, and the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, and what those guarantees of freedom were to the individual, to all the peoples, not just those that happen to be in control of the machinery of government, but to every citizen. And it was a pretty illuminating experience for me, and this kind of set me afire, and I've decided that this is the one way we can work ourselves out of this morass of police state tactics that we see around us so often, the repression of truth, of people attacking their neighbors and accusing their neighbors of thinking bad thoughts and not being sufficiently patriotic. The way a man expresses his patriotism, feels about his country, is a purely personal matter. Some choose to put placards on their car, "America, love it or leave it," which is a presumptuous and asinine kind of advertisement of their lack of knowledge of patriotism, because some patriots feel that they can only express their patriotism by compelling their neighbor to feel exactly as they do. Always when you discover that somebody wants to compel his neighbor to do something by threats or by intimidation or by repression, he usually is someone who doesn't trust himself. See, if we don't trust our own capacities as free men, our capacity to think freely and act correctly or incorrectly on those the judgments we make, then we want to be told, and that's where the American people went awry. That's how we got into Watergate. There are people that were perfectly willing to tell us how we'd better behave. When forces get loose that create such fear and hysteria that we turn on ourselves and begin to injure ourselves and those institutions for maintaining justice that we have. This is a matter that should be of pertinence to every single human being that breathes in this land of ours, because it's very basic with my philosophy that all citizens in this land of high or low degree are responsible for their servant, the government. The boys that work in Washington, the boys that work in Austin, and the boys that work in the City Hall down at here in Waco. The theme remains the same, that they work for us, we don't work for them. And consequently, when things go awry with them, we have to look to ourselves.
Do you ever think society will be able to live in a harmonious relationship?
I not only think it will be able to, I think that everything that I learned as a little boy and concerning the basic relationship of me to my fellow man and what it should be indicates that we must learn to, because the earth's gotten very small, little Kiki, very small. What happens to the starving peoples of Bangladesh has a direct bearing on the lives of the American people. We don't know it yet. But see, you can get around the earth faster than you can get from Waco down to Austin, Texas when I was a little boy. And you can send word around the earth in a twinkling and send the images of people starving to death in Bangladesh around the earth or the various other places. And that is another comment on the fact that the richest, most prosperous, and best healed, best fed, best housed, best clothed nation in the world is suddenly saying that if we don't get ours, we'll come get it. This is what Mr. Kissinger says. If you try to deprive us of this. Well, you see, that's the law of the jungle, because what about those countries that are starving to death? What if they say, well, if you've got all the food, we're going to come get it. It's our right to. We must do it. We won't rule out, right? You see, this turns loose the dogs of hate and the dogs of war in a world where we can no longer afford the luxury of those kind of elements in our society. We're going to have to learn to live together.
Do you see yourself sort of as a missionary through your radio and television work to remind the people of their inherent rights and of their inherent capability to tell the difference between right and wrong?
Well, that's a real sweet word, missionary, but one that I certainly don't deserve, and nor do I pretend to have any of the qualities of a missionary. I feel as a thoughtful American citizen, and I do consider myself one, and a very fortunate American citizen, that I do have an obligation to my neighbor and to those that maybe haven't reflected on these things to share my thoughts with them. Whether they accept my thoughts is another matter, but these are my thoughts on it, and I find that people are inclined to live in peace and harmony if they are allowed to, if other elements and forces don't interfere with it, and consequently I feel a very great gratification at having the means by which I can communicate these ideas and receive their ideas. You see, a dialogue is a two-way street. You have to listen as well as talk, and I'd like to think that I have a capacity to listen. As a little boy, I learned to listen because Mama made me, mostly by exercising a very arbitrary right of saying, nothing more out of you, young man. Now, I don't want to hear another word out of you. And I was always right and she was wrong and my sisters were wrong, but I learned to tolerate letting them express their opinion. I never agreed with them, but I was very sweet and thoughtful and let them express it, mostly because Mama made it impossible for me not to.
Why did you decide to leave Austin, where you grew up in that area and you also attended school there?
Because CBS induced me to come to New York City, and I homesteaded on Manhattan Island for a spell and enjoyed the joys of Manhattan life, but always with the thought of getting back home. Because, you know, like a old head of livestock, I want to get back to my home stomping grounds. But I moved from Austin now because it's getting to be a big idiot city that's just sprattling off every direction. These developers without any planning are just sprawling. Urban blight is going to take over, and I'd seen it happen in New York and many other metropolitan centers. So I moved to a little town called Madisonville, where everybody's either a Methodist or a Baptist. And I'm very much at home there, where there is a sense of community, incidentally. It's a little town down the other side of Bryan, Texas, about 30 miles.
Do you think that maybe then society, to get back to the neighbor idea and the goodwill idea, will have to leave the big city and leave that for the working area and return to a smaller community aspect?
Yes, I think that's certainly they're going to have to plan their societies, because the quality of life is as important as the quantity of life we are discovering. And all one has to do is look to the ghettos of the huge metropolitan areas to realize that the highest crime rate, the highest level of suffering is there. Our prisons are filled with peoples from the ghettos, where the places of business have to bar up and shutter their windows at night because there's no way to protect them. There's no way the police can protect the peoples. And this is a very heavy toll for a society, as wise as I'd like to think ours is, and as productive as I'd like to think ours is, to pay. I'd hate to see all of Waco, for instance, have to bar their windows at night because hunger and deprivation was so widespread that no one was safe. And this can only be done by establishing economic justice as well as political justice in a land.
You've been listening to a special report on John Henry Faulk, the man and his ideas. A presentation of 107 News. This is Kiki Dreyer.